Hello everybody, today's lesson will be poetry. The title of our poem today is A Blessing and it is written by James Wright. Regarding the objectives of this lesson, by the end of this lesson you will be able to: Number 1. Identify any irregular poem. Number 2. Analyze its component parts. Number 3. You will be able to predict its theme or author's message. And finally, you will be able to identify the figures of speech and the sound devices found in this poem. A blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, Twilight bounced softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture, where they have been grazing all day, alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She's black and white, her mane falls wide on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly I realize that if I stepped over my body, I would break into blossom. Now dears, let's know some information about the poet himself. James Wright was born in 1927 and died 1980. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. His poetry often praised the joy and comfort found in nature. He was born in Martins Ferry, Ohio. He was known as a master of a variety of writing styles and for the beauty and emotional quality of his work. His early poems were often focused on isolation and loneliness, while his later ones were focused on nature. Now dears, let's compare the two photos found in front of you together. On the left we have the photo of two Indian ponies. One of them is black and white. And on the right we have the photo of two tigers. As you know dears, Indian ponies or horses are domesticated animals, while tigers are wild animals. A blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, Twilight bounced softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture, where they have been grazing all day, alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She's black and white, her mane falls wide on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly I realize that if I stepped over my body, I would break into blossom. Now let's analyze the poem together. Regarding the genre of this poem, it is a free verse irregular poem. What about its form and structure? It's a free verse irregular poem of 24 lines, written in only one stanza. It has neither regular rhyme scheme nor rhythm. And the theme of this poem is pet-human relationship. Moving to the setting of the poem, the time in which the poem is set is twilight, and twilight is the time of the day. In which season? During springtime. What about the place of this poem? The poem takes place in a pasture on the way to Rochester, Minnesota. Our essential question today is, can animals and humans share an emotional connection? Who is the speaker of this poem? The poet, James Wright himself, is the speaker of this poem. Our poem has a joyful, merry, happy, and cheerful tone. Now, let's know some background information about the relationship between horses and men. For thousands of years, people have relied on horses. Why? To carry their belongings, plow fields, and to take them farther and faster than they could go on their own feet. But the relationship with horses is not only about work. We can also share a deep emotional connection with these graceful animals. Now, dears, let's read a very concise summary of the poem itself. A pair of travelers is driving near Rochester, Minnesota. It was during the fall of the night. The eyes of two Indian ponies were clear in the darkness. The two ponies have come out of the willow trees. Why? To welcome the visitors. The two visitors tried to go toward the ponies into the pasture where they have been eating grass all day alone. The two ponies make a soft noise, expressing happiness as they see the two visitors. They love each other, they bow shyly, but they are so lonely. The two ponies start chewing the grass. One of the visitors likes the little pony as she comes over to him. The poet describes the little pony, which moves toward the visitor, that it is black and white. Her long hair falls on her neck. He starts to touch her ear gently. By touching the skin of the pony, he finds it as delicate as the skin of a girl's wrist. The poet will transform into a flower that is fresh, tender, and colorful, like the ponies he admires. The emotion the poet experiences here is joy. Now, dears, please, let's watch together this nice photo. It explains everything about our poem today. Here we have a willow tree. From under this willow tree came two Indian ponies. One of them is black and white, and she is the slenderer one, the thinner one. Also, we have two travelers, or a pair of travelers. The two ponies exist in a pasture. This pasture is surrounded by a barbed wire fence. A barbed wire fence. I think everything is clear now. Now, dears, it's time to compare the domesticated animals represented by the two Indian ponies to humans. Of course, there are some common traits or some connections between humans and domesticated animals, such as being kind, being happy or glad, being welcoming, being lonely, and finally, horses also share the emotions of love, warmth, and affection. Imagery or images or sensory languages are the same thing. So imagery is a way of writing that appeals to one or more of the five senses: the sense of sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste. Poets use images so the readers can imagine seeing, smelling, touching, hearing, or tasting them. Examples: if a poet is writing about ice cream, he can use these words. Cold and delicious ice cream. It is an image that appeals to the sense of taste. Or the same poet can say white and snowy ice cream. And in this case, the image here appeals to the sense of sight. Now, dears, let's discuss the images found in this poem together. Image number 1. Twilight bounds softly forth on the grass. Here, the poet uses sensory language through the words twilight and grass to create an image that appeals to the sense of sight, as if the reader is seeing the scene himself. Image number 2. Her mane falls wild on her forehead. Here the poet uses sensory language through the words mane and forehead to create an image that appeals to the sense of sight. Image number 3. They bow shyly as wet swans. The poet uses sensory language through the words bow and wet to create an image that appeals to the sense of sight. Image number 4. As wet swans. The poet uses sensory language through the word wet. Why? To create an image that appeals to the sense of touch. You can feel anything wet using your hands. Image number 5. Her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Here the poem uses sensory language through the word delicate to create an image that appeals to the sense of touch. Moving to the figures of speech found in this poem, we have some metaphors and similes. Metaphor number 1. They can hardly contain their happiness. Here the poet compares happiness to a physical thing that can be hidden. Metaphor number 2. Her mane falls wild on her forehead. Here the poet compares the hair on the pony's forehead to a physical thing that can fall. Here is a personification. Twilight bounds softly forth on the grass. Here the poet personifies twilight, and twilight is a time of the day as a person who can walk on the grass. The second personification is found in the line, they have come gladly out of the willow. Here the poet personifies the two Indian ponies as people who can come and who can be happy. Personification number 3. To welcome my friend and me. Here the poet personifies the two Indian ponies as people who can welcome or greet their visitors. Personification number 4. They bow shyly. Here the poet personifies the two ponies as people who bow to greet the two travelers. The first simile can be found in they bow shyly as wet swans. Here the poet likens the two ponies to wet swans. The second simile can be found in her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Here the poet likens the pony's ear to the skin of a girl's wrist. There is a contrast in the words black and white. Here the poet brings the two opposite words black and white together to clarify the meaning. Moving to the sound devices of this poem, we have alliteration between some words such as willow, welcome, my, me, can, contain, hardly, happiness, loneliness, like, falls, forehead. Also, alliteration can be found between the following words: moves, me, body, break, blossom. Repetition is also used as a sound device in this poem. So in lines 5, 8, 9, 11 and 14, the pronoun they is repeated, in addition to the first person pronoun I and my and me all over the poem, because this poem is narrated from the first person point of view. Dear students, this is the end of today's lesson. I hope that every one of you has enjoyed the lesson. I have enjoyed the lesson with you. Thank you for listening and for paying attention, and see you in another lesson, inshallah.